Tonight on The World with me, Yalda Hakim, 12 people, including 6 children, are killed after a migrant boat rips apart in the English Channel. The ship wrecked off France's northern coast in what's been described as a horrifying incident. We're live in Calais with the latest. In Ukraine, at least 51 people are killed and more than 270 injured in one of the deadliest Russian strikes since the war began. The attack happened as Vladimir Putin visited Mongolia, a country seemingly ignoring the arrest warrant out for the Russian president. Israelis are out protesting again tonight, and their anger is echoed by a former prime minister who tells me a ceasefire is possible with the right level of pressure from the United States.
Explain to this arrogant government of Israel what needs to be explained.
Plus, risking kidnap and being killed by smuggling gangs, the drastic steps Indians are taking to reach the United States illegally. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening and welcome to this special edition of The World, live from Jerusalem with me, Yalda Hakim. We've been reporting here from Israel for the last few days about the ongoing protests, the general strike that we saw yesterday. And of course, Israelis are back on the streets tonight protesting against the government's handling of the war in Gaza and their efforts to free hostages. In tonight's show, you'll hear from a former Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, who tells me now is the time for President Biden to apply more pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. And that really is the sentiment across this country, that enough is not being done to put pressure on Netanyahu. That conversation in a moment. But we'd like to begin tonight's show with the situation, of course, in the English Channel. We want to bring you the very latest on the sinking of the boat. At least 12 people have died, among them 6 children. Up to 65 people have also been rescued. Well, the incident happened near the coast of Portel in northern France. A large search and rescue operation is still underway. The French coastguard have said urgent medical attention is being provided at a facility at Boulogne-sur-Mer. Our international correspondent John Sparks has this report from Calais.
This incident is both horrifying and utterly familiar. At least 13 have lost their lives after a boat packed with migrants sank off northern France. The authorities alerted just before noon as an overloaded craft ripped, then capsized southwest of Calais. The authorities sent multiple vessels and search helicopters to the passengers' aid, and more than 60 have been plucked from the sea.
This morning is a tragedy that affects us all. I'd like to thank all the emergency services who risked their lives to save these people. Of course, these 12 deaths are to be deplored. Once again, the sea, the channel that we love so much, has become a place where men, women and children die at the hands of smugglers, who are the real criminals.
And as the first casualties were brought ashore, many needed emergency treatment. After several days of calm seas, conditions in the channel have worsened, the French describing the channel as agitated. But the people smugglers didn't think to wait.
In any situation of rescue, if a rescue is needed, and in this circumstance it sounds that something very catastrophic took place, and I would guess that most of the people that were involved in this would definitely want to be rescued. With this many people, it would be a sort of multi-agency operation, so a lot of different resources would need to be scrambled to be able to cope with such a large-scale situation.
While governments change, the lure of a new life in Britain does not. In Dover, we saw migrants from other small boats who had made the journey across. Figures show that since Labour took power in early July, nearly 8,000 have crossed the channel by small boats. This a human and a political problem that is very difficult to solve.
These dangerous boat crossings are being facilitated for financial reward by smuggling gangs who don't care about the safety of the people that they are cramming onto boats, often over-cramming onto boats and causing these dangerous crossings, and it's that we've got to stop happening in the future.
Promises made by the British and the French to stop this deadly trade remain an aspiration.
And of course, John joins us live now. And John, sadly, and it's devastating, but these images are images that we've become all too familiar with.
That's absolutely right, Yalda. It is awful. It's distressing. It's horrifying. But I don't think it's going to come as a surprise, as a shock to the people here in northern France. And it was people here on the coast that saw this boat, the people in this boat, in distress in the later hours of this morning. Officials later saying that the floor, they often have these plexiglass floors in these boats, that the floor had ripped, the craft then capsized, throwing more than 70 people into the sea that was described by the authorities today as agitated. Now, the prosecutor in Boulogne-sur-Mer, a community just down the coast from Calais, he has spoken this evening. He has confirmed that at least 12 people have died. He said 10 of the 12 were females, some adults, some minors, some children. And he said that they were primarily Eritrean, so from the country of Eritrea in East Africa. We also understand the passengers in that boat were not wearing life jackets. We know that a significant number have suffered terribly from this incident, suffering from very serious injuries. The French set up an advanced medical post in Boulogne-sur-Mer. The people coming in, getting treatment as the day went on, as the search and rescue mission went on. But I can tell you, we've just got off the phone with the authorities. They have said that the search and rescue operation is now over. It's finished as far as they are concerned. Now, with an incident as awful as this, of course, it triggers a comment, it triggers debate as well. We've heard from the UK Border Security Minister, Angela Eagle. She said that there is a dangerous trend developing where these boats are deteriorating in quality and they are becoming more and more overloaded. We've also heard from the French Interior Minister as well, saying that the UK and France have to do more. They have to cooperate. They have to work together if they're going to stop incidents like this.
Yeah, and John, the other issue is, I mean, we almost expect the numbers to rise in these months, don't we? Because, of course, when the weather is better and hotter and warmer, people do tend to then attempt this risky journey.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think we have to say that up to this point in the year, the number of people trying to reach the UK is basically the same as it was last year, and the number of migrants making the trip compared to 2022 is significantly down. But the business model is intact. You know, demand is high, generally made up by people from countries like Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Albania, Syria. But in this case, we've got people from Eritrea, and I think that does say something about worldwide demand from people trying to get to the UK. The government response, it's based on deterrence, isn't it? It's based on physical enforcement. That's what the new Labour government are promising, to smash the smuggling gangs. But I think we're entitled to ask, will it work?
Indeed, very much so. John, thank you so much for your reporting there. And as John was saying, it's not just the number of boats making this very dangerous journey that's of growing concern, but also the increasing number of people being crammed onto each of these vessels. Let's just take a look at some of the key data that's available to us. Well, according to the Home Office, more than 21,000 people have crossed on small boats so far this year. We can also see how the average number of people getting on boats has shot up from an average of 13 people in 2020 to an average of 52 people this year. That is 4 times higher than 5 years ago. Let's delve deeper into what's driving that increase. I'm joined now by Krista Rottensteiner, the UK Chief of Mission of the International Organization for Migration. Krista, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. I mean, we were just talking there with my colleague, John Sparks, who's there in Calais, that these images are images that we have sadly become all too familiar with. But the numbers do continue to increase and people continue to make this very deadly, risky journey.
Absolutely. It is so distressing to see the tragedy today that at least 12 people have died. This is the most serious incident this year. IOM, as the UN Migration Agency, is recording deaths in the Channel and also globally, and we know that over 40 people have died this year. And as you say, the trend continues. We see globally that the numbers are increasing. We started our records 10 years ago to record missing and dead migrants, and was very sad to see that last year we broke a new record. And overall, 68,000 people have died over the last 10 years during their migration journeys. So something urgently needs to be done to reduce those dangerous journeys, because we should really prevent tragedies like the ones happening today from occurring again.
Well, we continue to hear governments make those sorts of pledges, talk about resolving the issue in the source and home countries. But it's been almost 10 years since the migrant crisis that we talked about a decade ago, and leaders at the time talked about resolving this issue. And to think that, you know, the sorts of numbers you're quoting are horrifying.
Absolutely. And it is a very difficult situation to solve. I mean, we often talk about a migration crisis, but for me, the true crises are the dangerous journeys that people feel they have no other alternative than getting on a boat or to cross a dangerous desert. So we really should tackle this. And like you say, tackling the root causes is very critical. We need to look at the reasons why people take these dangerous journeys, because no one would undertake such a journey lightly. We've heard about children and women being on the boat, and IOM knows from our records that we see more and more families crossing the Channel, and no one really would undertake this journey if they weren't absolutely desperate. People often leave because they feel they have no other alternative. They lack economic opportunities, but more often they flee conflict and repression. So until we solve these issues, we can unfortunately expect further tragedies and further dangerous journeys. So we need to focus more on preventing conflict, on solving conflict, and put all our efforts into reducing the reasons why people leave. But the other thing that we really need to look at is to have safe and regular pathways. Some of them exist, but there are very few of them. So that's why people often don't see another alternative. And that's what also drives smuggling. But if we have more pathways for people to travel safely to countries like the UK, then we can undermine the business model of smugglers.
Yeah, indeed. And I was in Calais just a couple of months ago, and you can see the makeup of migrants changing. A lot of Sudanese arriving as well into the area as a conflict erupts there. Krista, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's turn our attention to the conflict in Ukraine. It's been one of the deadliest days in Ukraine since the war began. At least 51 people have been killed and more than 270 injured after Russia hit a military training facility with 2 ballistic missiles. The attack happened in the central eastern city of Poltava. A building used by the city's Military Institute of Communications was partially destroyed, and a nearby hospital was also hit. Being a military installation, Ukrainian restrictions only allow us to show you these images that you're seeing on the screen of the destruction in Poltava. The attack came 4 weeks after Ukraine's incursion into the Kursk region of Russia. Today, President Zelensky vowed to indefinitely hold the Russian territory his troops have seized. Well, President Zelensky was speaking to NBC News' chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who joins me now live from Kiev. Richard, really good to see you. And of course, you've spoken to President Zelensky today. Just give us a sense of what he said, because he made some remarks there about Kursk.
He did, Yalda. That's what I think was so interesting, that the timing of this interview was important. I've sat down with President Zelensky in interviews like this for more than a half dozen times since the start of the war. And this was perhaps one of the more interesting or surprising, because he said almost nothing about the operation, which was flipping the whole script of the war on Russia, on Vladimir Putin. And he said actually nothing about the plans that he has for this territory. So he took this territory in a surprise move, and he said that he did not inform the Pentagon, did not inform other foreign governments, didn't inform members of his own government until the very last second. He said that it was a preemptive strike, that Ukrainian intelligence learned and also other intelligence agencies told them that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine and capture a buffer zone. So they decided to strike first, grab a piece of Russia, and today he said they're going to hold it indefinitely. And that was the part, I think, that sort of advances the story, brings it forward from today. And that was where I started the interview this morning when I sat down with him and I said, President Zelensky, what's next? Now you've captured this territory in Russia. So the big question is, what do you plan to do with it?
Нам не потрібна російська територія. Я це завжди.
We don't need the Russian territory. Our operation is aimed to restore our territorial integrity. We capture Russian troops to replace them with the Ukrainian. We tell them, we need our military soldiers in exchange with the Russian one. The same attitude is to the territories. We don't need their land.
Is the plan to take more territory? Or
I will not tell her. Sorry, I can't speak about it. It's like the beginning of our this Kursk operation. With all respect, I can't speak about it. I think that the success is very close to surprise.
But conceptually, you have this territory now. You say you don't want to keep it long term.
Conceptually, we will hold it. Conceptually, we will hold it.
President Zelensky there speaking to you, Richard, a little earlier there. But I guess the next question is, with the focus on keeping, for the Ukrainians, keeping this Russian territory, perhaps indefinitely or for as long as they can keep it, how much pressure does that put on them when it comes to, retaining other areas within Ukraine that the Russians are, continuing to target and attack them over?
And that is the fundamental question that Ukrainians are asking. Ukrainian military officers I've been speaking to are asking themselves. This country has limited resources. It is dependent on foreign military supplies in order to keep fighting this war. Can Ukraine, with the resources, with the manpower that it has, hold roughly 1,200 square kilometers of territory inside Russia, which is different for Ukraine? It is operating, till now, it's been operating on its own soil, where it has the support of friendly locals. Now it's operating in enemy territory, where the locals' behavior certainly cannot be trusted. It's a different type of conflict. Can Ukraine hold a piece of foreign territory for long and continue to defend the East? And just in the last several days, there have been significant Russian advances in the East. And then earlier today, we saw this ballistic missile strike in Poltava, which isn't very far from Kursk. And perhaps it was Vladimir Putin sending a message, because this area that Ukraine has occupied is really just over the border from Poltava, where there was this devastating attack. So can Ukraine do both? President Zelensky hopes they can, and he hopes that by taking this piece of Russia, it will not only boost morale here, but it'll encourage Ukraine's backers, particularly in the United States, that Ukraine needs more support, deserves more support, and he now plans to go to Washington at the end of this month on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meeting and present his plan. He describes it as a plan for victory to President Biden and Vice President Harris and candidate Donald Trump on the heels of this operation. So he's going to the U.S. on the with a full set of steam, so to speak, saying, look what we just did in Russia. We need more support. But yes, it comes with a cost. Can they hold all this territory, and for how long?
Yeah, indeed. What happens over the next few months is certainly very, very significant for the Ukrainians. Richard, thank you so much for joining us, and our viewers can watch your interview on the NBC website. Thanks again. Well, as news of that attack came in, Vladimir Putin was being given a lavish welcome in Mongolia. Well, the country, being a signatory of the International Criminal Court, has come under criticism for not arresting President Putin, despite an international warrant issued against him. Instead, the Russian leader was given the red carpet treatment. Let's speak to our Moscow correspondent, Iva Bennett, who's in the Russian capital tonight for us. And Iva, these sorts of images we are seeing of Vladimir Putin in certain countries, but it is surprising that Mongolia is a signatory of these courts, and yet an arrest warrant hasn't been issued.
Yeah, good evening, Yalda. It's pretty extraordinary, isn't it? That red carpet arrival he got at the airport, the gala dinner tonight. I mean, you would have thought Mongolia might want to tone it down a bit, not draw attention to the fact that they're not fulfilling these ICC obligations to arrest someone who's accused of war crimes, but clearly not. They actually seem to be embracing their situation. And I think the reason for that is this, that they clearly feel, Mongolia thinks, that they've got more to lose by arresting Vladimir Putin than if they don't arrest him. And that is because Mongolia is hugely reliant on Russia for things like fuel, electricity, and they don't want to risk upsetting a powerful neighbour like Russia, especially as they've only got two neighbours, Russia and China. They will have upset The Hague. They have upset Kiev. Ukraine has accused Mongolia today of sharing responsibility for war crimes by not arresting Vladimir Putin. But that kind of condemnation is about as bad as it's going to get for Mongolia, and they've clearly factored that in. For Vladimir Putin, though, this is a very big win indeed. It needles the West, it scores a point against the West, and it shows them whatever they throw at Vladimir Putin, it just doesn't seem to stick right now.
Indeed, Iva, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. Well, stay with me on The World with Yalda Hakim. We've got lots more coming up after the break, including Hamas releasing a propaganda video of one of the 6 Israeli hostages whose bodies were found last week as pressure over reaching a ceasefire deal reaches boiling point. I'll speak to the Palestinian ambassador to the UK next.
It was a complete shock. So when we signed up for the swim, I just wanted to go and see if we could finish the swim. I never even imagined that I'd be anywhere near the record. So it's been quite amazing. It has actually now been ratified overnight as well. So it is officially the women's world record now. It was a pretty special swim. So we had perfect conditions. The water was really quite warm. It was about 24 degrees and there was no wind. So it was really calm. But it was just absolutely stunning. The first probably 12, 15 hours went really smooth. I was really strong. And then the last 5 hours were really, really painful, coming in through the night in the pitch black. Had a lot of fatigue in my back, had a lot of fatigue in my core and my abs. So it's just a case of just keep pushing, head down, try and keep it positive and just get to the finish. I think that's definitely the hardest side of endurance swimming. If you can keep your mind positive and your mind going, then your body will keep going. So it's just a case of appreciating how lucky I was and thinking about where I was and what I was doing. Not many people get to swim down the length of Lake Geneva at 4 a.m. in the morning with their best friends, do they? So, yeah, it was really special, and that's just how we kept it going. My training probably looks slightly different to other people's. I work 2 jobs and I have 2 children, so it's very much a juggling act. I think my mileage is probably a lot less than most people's, and that's where that mental side of it comes from. If you know that you can do it, then you know you've got a much more better chance of getting there. Last summer, I swam the length of Loch Awe, Loch Ness and Loch Lomond. So we call that the Scottish Triple Crown. They're the 3 biggest lochs in Scotland. And I think them 3 combined were just the perfect training for this year. Well, I think that's what we're trying to find. I thought 70k might be the limit, but I've recovered really well and I swam really strong. So who knows? We'll keep going.
Welcome back to Jerusalem with me, Yalda Hakim. And in this country, there is a real sense of anger and frustration at the lack of a ceasefire deal. Earlier today, Hamas released a hostage video of one of the 6 Israeli hostages who were found dead in Gaza over the weekend. Eden Yerushalmi's family described it as a shocking psychological terror video. That sentiment echoed by leadership here. Anti-Netanyahu pro-ceasefire, however, you want to describe the demonstrations that have taken place across the country this week. People still feel their voices aren't being heard. This is frustration all around this issue of a ceasefire. Let's get a Palestinian view on the state of negotiations around a ceasefire in Gaza. And I'm pleased to say I'm joined now by Hussam Zumlot, Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom. Mr. Zumlot, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. It has been, and you and I have spoken on a number of occasions, an incredibly difficult 9 or 10 months for the people of Gaza, for the Palestinian people, and of course for the families of the hostages here in this country. We have seen an eruption here of demonstrations because people are demanding from their Prime Minister for a ceasefire deal. Your reaction to the events of the last few days?
Disheartening, and really tells you all what you need to know. I mean, you have an Israeli Prime Minister who has decided that he does not want the hostages back. He does not want a ceasefire, and his calculation is very clear. It's personal because he knows the moment a ceasefire deal is reached, he is done. And for ideological. I mean, the world saw his map only last night in his press conference, whereby the West Bank didn't exist. This is a person, that is Netanyahu, that sees the future, only that, a future without the Palestinian people. And that's why he's doing what he is doing. It's a war of extermination for him against the Palestinian people. He has not been targeting any militias for that matter. The world have followed what happened over the last 11 months. So our hopes now is sufficient pressure is mounting on this Israeli government. So actually they do heed the existing ceasefire deal that has been on the table since May. And remember, it was President Biden who has offered that in May, and then it was a Security Council resolution. And since then, Netanyahu has been every day changing the goalpost, maneuvering everybody, outmaneuvering everybody, trying to outsmart everybody simply because he's not interested in his own people. And that's why you see all these demos in Israel and worldwide.
Yeah, Mr. Zumlot, as you say, there are accusations even from within his cabinet, from his defense minister, who has accused Mr. Netanyahu of attempting to derail the ceasefire negotiations over this Philadelphia corridor. But let's talk about Hamas's position, because we saw these 6 hostages executed, and Hamas has admitted that it has changed its strategy, that it is now asking for its fighters to kill and execute hostages if they feel that the Israeli military is going to come and extract them from Gaza militarily.
No, Yalda, if you want to talk about Hamas, speak to Hamas, please. Our position here as the State of Palestine and the government of Palestine is very clear. We wanted from day one an immediate and permanent ceasefire, a ceasefire of that atrocious aggression, genocidal aggression. We want to make sure that humanitarian assistance is reaching its destination without any obstacles, and we wanted to move swiftly towards an international process of accountability, because we don't want to see this repeated again. And therefore we believe that it is Netanyahu, and squarely Netanyahu and on Netanyahu, that has been derailing all this process. So let's not get into the details. What is happening in the West Bank is all what you need to know.
I guess the details...
All what you need to know, Yalda.
Yeah, absolutely. And
go on.
And I'd like to talk about the West Bank. Because I did speak to former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert today, who expressed outrage and anger at the situation in the West Bank. And I'd like you to comment on that. But in terms of, the finger of blame being pointed on Netanyahu, which the Israeli people are doing, but also, do you feel that given Hamas's stance now on executing and I know you're saying I need to speak to Hamas, but they are part of this equation in terms of whether a peace deal is reached or not for the Palestinian people.
Well, that's why we believe that all the good work of mediators over the months have fruited in a deal that was offered to all parties. According to what we have heard from the mediators, the deal was ready, and Netanyahu was the one who rejected it and kept changing the goalpost. I mean, didn't you hear Israeli officials today, including Gantz and Eisenkot, saying that Philadelphia corridor has no security meaning and Netanyahu is using it as a pretext? So what? What do you want us to do, Yalda, in this conversation? He is to be blamed. The Israeli government is to be blamed. These group of fanatics, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, that are the landlords of the West Bank now, and unleashing unprecedented terror on the Palestinian people, stealing more land, allowing the settler violence and terrorism all over the West Bank. And you have also followed the Israeli military invasions of Jenin and Tulkarem and other places, the utter destruction and murder of innocent lives. And therefore, yes, we should not just waste our time or just focus on the small details. The big picture. Netanyahu told the world yesterday that he has no plan. The future he sees is a future without one Palestinian, not one. And this is the conversation. What else? And that's why we have been calling on the UK government, on the US, on the international community to take action rather than just taking resolutions and piling these international resolutions, UN Security Council resolutions. We have more than 80 resolutions now in the Security Council unimplemented, and create leverage with such an Israeli government, including the issue of arms embargo. And you may have followed that the UK government yesterday announced a partial suspension of some weapons exportation to Israel. But also we are working with the international community on the issue of sanctioning all this ecosystem of the illegal settlements and the occupation that is sponsoring these illegal settlers, especially in light of the clear ruling of the International Court of Justice that Israel's presence in the occupied territory is unlawful and illegal. And here, there is such a responsibility on the international community, because let me say this from my heart, Yalda, it shouldn't take us any argument. We should not even be arguing with UK government or any other government that they should cease exporting arms to Israel. I mean, this is such a clear-cut case, and had we implemented international law 76 years ago, we wouldn't have gotten to where we are today. And compare this to Ukraine and see, did the Ukrainian people had to argue the case with London or Washington or Paris or any other Western capital? No, it was straightforward. Sanctions on Russia, and they actually helped the Ukrainian resistance via arms. So this is a time when we create real leverage against a state actor that has been found by the ICJ, by the ICC, by numerous international organizations to be in flagrant violations of the very basic provisions of international law.
Mr. Zumlot, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. And as I said, we've also spoken to Ehud Olmert, who talked about his concerns around the settler violence in the West Bank, and we'll be showing that to our viewers in the next few minutes. But we're grateful for your time. Stay with us on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. After the break, as I said, we will be speaking with the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert on the pressure that needs to be put on Benjamin Netanyahu for a ceasefire deal to be reached. Stay with us. Welcome back to Jerusalem. And as I've been reporting, there's growing outrage over the failure to bring more hostages home from Gaza. And as we heard earlier, Hamas caused more anger overnight by releasing a hostage video of one of the 6 Israeli hostages who were found dead in Gaza over the weekend. Eden Yerushalmi's family described it as a shocking psychological terror video. That sentiment echoed by leadership here. Our Middle East correspondent Ali Bunkel has this report.
Carmel Gat was one of the 6 hostages killed by Hamas last week. When I last saw her cousin Shay, only a few weeks ago, she told us how Carmel would be staying strong by teaching yoga to her fellow hostages. But most of all, she kept telling us that she was just looking forward to hugging her cousin again. Yesterday, they buried Carmel near her parents' home on the kibbutz, where she was taken from on October the 7th.
You know, I will never be able to hug Carmel again, but there are so many people who still can. And for their sake, I want to make it clear. A deal is what brings you back alive, and war is what kills you. All I want is this suffering to end.
On Monday evening, Hamas published a video of another of the hostages, Eden Yerushalmi. This short clip was authorized for release by her family.
אני רוצה לפנות למשפחה היקרה שלי שאני כל כך אוהבת ואני מתגעגעת אליכם, אמא, אבא, שני, מאי, אני אוהבת אתכם כל כך, כל כך, כל כך ואני מתגעגעת אליכם.
Hamas has released another video tonight. The families say it is psychological torture. Benjamin Netanyahu asked for the forgiveness of the families of those 6 people. Do you forgive him?
No. His decision-making caused Carmel's death. It's that simple.
Tel Aviv tonight is once again the scene of anti-government protests, and major roads are blocked for the 4th day in a row. Police fought to keep control, wading in with horses and on foot. The crowd surrounded them, angry and refusing to give ground.
The atmosphere tonight is not like other nights. The police have tried to put out the fires twice. They've failed every time. They've been blocked by the protesters, who have then chased them to the other side of the street. And it's the protesters pushing the police back.
Netanyahu will believe he can ride this out, as he has many protests before in his long political career. But they're not going away quietly when lives are still at stake. And with political leaders inside and outside of Israel pushing Netanyahu to do a deal, he can't easily dismiss this as just a loud left-wing minority. Alistair Bunkel, Sky News in Tel Aviv.
Well, that anger among hostage families is shared by Ehud Olmert, a predecessor of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Speaking to me earlier, he called on the US President Joe Biden to apply more pressure on Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire deal. Here's our conversation from a little earlier.
I think that we are coming very close to what may be perhaps a turning point. I hope it will be a turning point. I think that more and more people are getting sick and tired of listening to all these excuses and explanations and this rhetoric, empty rhetoric, arrogant rhetoric of the Prime Minister. Israel is in the middle of a dramatic crisis. Crisis is not the outside threats to the security of the State of Israel. There are threats. I don't underestimate the threats of our enemies. In the north, the Hezbollah; in the south, Hamas; in the east, the Iranian militias, and Iran itself. The problem is within the State of Israel. There is a growing messianic section in the Israeli population, which is led by ministers Ben Gvir and Minister Smotrich. Both of them are the stalwarts of this cabinet, of this government, and they are completely supported by Netanyahu. He is their captive. I'll do everything in my power, together with everyone that will join forces. They will agree to cooperate in order to stop them, because they are the real threat to what Israel is, what Israel was, and what Israel needs to be.
More so than Hamas, Iran,
Absolutely.
Hezbollah?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And already now, many of the Hilltop youth are equipped with weapons provided them illegally by the Israeli police through the decision, illegal decision, by the Minister of National Security, Mr. Ben-Gvir. And they are using some of these weapons already now against innocent Palestinians in the territories. This is absolutely obnoxious and outrageous and totally unacceptable. And when they have these weapons, I hope that one day they will not decide to use them against those amongst us.
Do you think the Americans have done enough to put pressure on Netanyahu? We're seeing tweets from the vice president. We're seeing Joe Biden say he's not doing enough.
Problem with Joe Biden is that he is a great lover of Israel. He is completely committed to the well-being of the state of Israel. And he's a decent guy. But I expected him that he will enter into a room with the Prime Minister, just him and the Prime Minister by themselves, and that he will explain, the Prime Minister, what needs to be explained in a way that the Prime Minister will understand. And I'm not sure he, as of yet, did it. Whether he will decide to do it from now on, if necessary, he should also take a baseball bat with him when he goes to the room. But I'm not certain that he is yet prepared to use the power of the United States of America as a committed supporter and friend of the state of Israel to explain to this arrogant government of Israel what needs to be explained.
Why not?
Because he is fully aware of the fact that Iran and many others are determined to somehow fight against the state of Israel, and he cares for the well-being of Israel, and he cares for the security of the state of Israel. And it's hard for someone from the outside, and I guess that's what he says to himself, to take all his power and use it against the Israeli government at a time when we are involved in such and entangled in such a very difficult and challenging situation. But he should listen to us. He should listen to the Israelis that he knows, that he is familiar with, that he has worked with, that he has grown to trust.
What are you calling on Biden and the Americans to do? To sanction some of these settler groups that are causing the violence in the West Bank? Or are you calling on a weapons ban the way that the UK has in the last 24 hours?
I want them to do to those criminals what needs to be done in order to punish them, because they don't represent Israel, and we don't want to be the victims of the atrocities that they are committing against innocent Palestinians.
Well, that was Ehud Olmert speaking to me there a little earlier. Let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who joins me now live from Tel Aviv. And Ali, from the protests to Joe Biden to we were hearing there from former leaders of Israel, there is continued mounting anger towards Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for his inaction when it comes to trying to reach some kind of ceasefire deal and to get these hostages home.
Yeah, I would say Benjamin Netanyahu is looking increasingly isolated. He has few allies in Israel, few political allies. And as Ehud Olmert was pointing out in that interview, his political allies at the moment seem to be two ministers who are on the extreme right wing of politics, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. Within his own cabinet, Benjamin Netanyahu is pretty isolated. He can make decisions on a solo basis. I mean, if you think he has very little to do with his foreign minister, for example, and he does shut out others from the high-level decision-making process. Ehud Olmert, I should say, former member of Likud, former member of Netanyahu's party, but they are not friends. They are now political enemies. There is no love lost between them. But it's not just Ehud Olmert tonight who's come out and spoken out against Netanyahu. Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot both gave a televised statement on television here a couple of hours ago, and it was a deliberate rebuttal to what Netanyahu said last night. To remind you, Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot were both members of Israel's war cabinet until June. They are in the political opposition, but they were part of that inner circle during many months of this war. So they have first-hand knowledge of what tactics and strategies were being discussed. And Gantz effectively said that Netanyahu had lied to the Israeli public. He spoke about the Philadelphia corridor, which Netanyahu insists on remaining in. But Gantz, who's also, I should point out, a former IDF chief of staff and defense minister, so he knows the military game very well, he said, yeah, the Philadelphia corridor is important, but there are ways around it. There is a way of withdrawing partially and then returning, but doing so in a way that a hostage deal could be approved. And so you've got all of these figures. You've got President Biden in the United States being, frankly, pretty dismissive of Netanyahu over the last 24 hours, saying that he's not doing enough for a deal, saying that he'll eventually speak to Netanyahu about ceasefire negotiations. And you've got others around the world who are urging a hostage deal. That is what's giving encouragement to the protesters on the streets. They were out again tonight. As I said in my report you saw earlier, they felt a lot angrier tonight, but they are driving their message, and they believe that they are getting more and more support behind them.
And Ali, just briefly, on Sunday night we saw tens of thousands of people out on the street. Last night there was still quite a large number of people out. Has it sort of felt like it's fizzled out a little bit more this evening?
The protest this evening was smaller, for sure, and the protests have got slightly smaller. It was about, the estimates, according to the organisers, was about 500,000 on Sunday night. Last night was big, but quieter, not quite as big. Tonight, well into the thousands here. And as I said, it was the tone for me that was different. You still had people from all cross-sections of society, the elderly, the young. I saw a few babies. I saw people come along with their dogs. That's the sort of the way of Israeli protests. It attracts everybody, whatever your age, and sometimes even whatever your political leaning. But tonight, there was more of a hardcore element, or maybe not a hardcore element, a determined element. They stopped the police from trying to disperse them multiple times. The police, I should say, in fairness, withdrew and didn't particularly use heavy-handed tactics. But I just sensed tonight that the mood is changing again, and it's hardening. And they heard what Netanyahu had to say last night, and they didn't like it, and they know that they're up against it, but they're equally as determined.
Ali, as always, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Well, we started the programme by bringing you news that at least a dozen people have died in the English Channel after a migrant boat wrecked off the northern coast of France. It's another stark reminder of the extreme lengths people make to start new lives, both here and across the world. We're now going to focus on India, where people are going to extraordinary lengths to illegally cross into the United States. Our India reporter Neville Lazarus reports.
India?
They will go to any lengths, dangerous journeys, trekking through jungles, and putting their lives in the hands of criminal gangs to reach the shores of America and Europe. Indians are now the third largest illegal migrants in America. Last year, the US Border Protection Agency apprehended about 100,000. And these are just who got caught. But many don't get that far. Subhash paid $50,000 to traffickers to take him to America. Instead, he was flown to Kathmandu, where he was kidnapped, tied up and threatened by smugglers. The gang used forged boarding passes and visas and filmed him with fake backgrounds to show he had arrived at the US border. The family then paid up. On a tip-off, Nepal police raided the building, arresting the kidnappers and rescuing him. I had lost all hope of living. I just wanted to speak to my family, my children for the last time. Malkit's belongings is all that is left with the family. Smuggled into El Salvador, the family lost all contact when he trekked to the borders of Guatemala. Weeks later, they identified his body from a video posted on social media. We believe he was killed for money. The mafia gangs involved were robbing them. They fired on my brother and killed him.
10
to 12% die, says Joginder, one of the many traffickers that operate these networks, sending over 1,000 people every year. It's a multi-billion-dollar trade that has insatiable demands. Ask anyone who has a big house and they will say their son is abroad. It's a race. People sell property, jewelry, and even their homes to leave. They want to go and I send. It's just business.
We have arrested almost 75 people still now.
The pace and scale has alarmed authorities, but it's an overwhelming task.
Children is saying, he will either die or you send me. Through social media, if someone is outside, they send the good photos in the big bungalows and big cars. They put that status. And these youths get attracted and they say that they will also get the same thing there.
The legal routes to immigrate is crowded, difficult and time-consuming. But for those determined to make that journey, all options are open, at whatever cost. Neville Lazarus, Sky News in Karnal, Haryana.
Well, from India to, as we saw today, the English Channel, the migrant crisis proving an ever-growing, deadly issue that leaders in Europe and further afield are yet to get on top of. That's it from the team and I here in Jerusalem. You've got the news at 10 next on Sky News, but for now, good night.